The Lovebirds. Now, this is a little strange. Didn't we just have a buddy action comedy like 6 months ago? Well, actually, no, actually about a year ago, I think. Yeah, we had the Stuber with Kumail Nanjiani in it. And again, we have another buddy film with Kumail once again. But this time it's a little bit of a romantic action comedy. It's still like a wild chase around town, solving a murder. There are guns involved. Lots of action happens. But it's framed a little bit more as a romantic comedy. So there's a little bit of an edge going here. So Kumail plays Gibran, and he's currently in a relationship with Lilani, played by Issa Rae. And I love how they show like we spend enough time with them where we get to see their relationship develop a little bit. We see the moment where they kind of connect, where they establish themselves as a couple, and then we skip ahead to them just fighting about stuff that you think wouldn't matter. Like they're arguing about The Amazing Race, and they're debating about reality shows. So basically, their relationship's about to go under. They're about to break up. They're just on the verge of ending it, and then they hit someone with their car. And before they know it, long story short, they're wrapped up into a scheme where they're basically accused of murder, and they're running from a bunch of people who want to kill them, and the cops as well, and they basically have to solve a murder in order to clear their names. That's the gist of it. I think most people got that from the trailer, and I think it's fairly obvious. A fairly straightforward setup, and it goes into some crazy places, I'll admit. But here's the thing, like, in order for this film to work, it has to have the chemistry of its characters. Kumail and Issa, they really have to work in this film. You have to believe that they're a couple, and you have to believe that they have problems and they work them out over the course of this film. Like the whole events that happen to them are of course ridiculous. There's scenes where they get kicked by horses. There's scenes where they put on ridiculous outfits, and they have a whole section here about like an eyes wide shut Illuminati secret orgy type deal, which is not as hilarious as you think it is. And that's what I think is kind of the problem with Lovebirds, is I think it relies a lot on the chemistry of Kumail and Issa to carry so much of this film. Like there's so many scenes where you can tell it's relying on improv. Like they have to drive the scene. There's not much going on in these scenes, and these two actors are expected to hold their own. And for the most part, I gotta admit, they kind of have a dynamic here. It'd be stupid to say they don't have something here. The problem is, I don't think it can quite carry on within this film that kind of just goes like, I don't quite want to say by the numbers action, but like action and action and absurdity that don't really like mount. Like it feels like kind of like plateaus about halfway through, and at that point you're just like, okay, all right, sure, eyes wide shut parody, sure, climax where one of them is held at gunpoint, but basically they just have to. These two actors just have to keep talking. They have to let these scenes go on longer, and so much of them you feel like, okay, the scene needs to be cut short a little bit. Like this is kind of the problem I sense with like a lot of improv comedies, is that they go on. You can tell like they're just trying to extend it and make it go on longer than these scenes should, and they just kind of linger and just keep going and going. And I'm sure they think it's funny, and the director thought it was funny, but the longer that they go, you can tell like, okay, we're just extending it out here, and they're struggling to make laughs here, and you're just waiting for them to cut to the next scene. The thing is, I wasn't as waiting for them to cut to the next scene, because even when we get into like the action stuff, I gotta admit there is some funny slapstick stuff here. I like the bits where basically like Issa is basically debating with Kumail about how to kick in a door. Like she's basically says like, how am I supposed to kick in a door? I'm wearing shoes, and they argue about, well, I got beat up in the last encounter, and they have this debate about how do you break open stuff. I kind of admit some of that stuff works. If it was a more dynamic action comedy, that would have worked so well here. But it's not. Like it lingers on. Like scenes of interrogation have to keep going. They have to be extended as they keep going, and you can't help but feel like, man, if it was trimmed a little bit, if there's a little bit more action, just a little bit more to the chases, there could have really been something here. But by the time we get to the climax, where it's basically they have to just argue with each other and work out their differences while someone holds them at gunpoint, and they basically have to make the tough call on how to beat up the bad guy. It just kind of is like, okay, we're just kind of going by the motions by this point. I feel like with the whole Eyes Wide Shut parody, we kind of just peaked, with the ridiculousness that we could have here. And yeah, it's just one of those instances where there's great chemistry and there's a dynamic. Like I'm rooting for Kumail and Issa. I like them, but there's so many scenes. You're just like, okay, we gotta trim this up a bit. Like you're letting the scene go on for longer than it should, and the comedy it's just kind of evaporating the longer the scene goes on. It needs just a little bit of an extra kick. Like Stuber from last year is not a great buddy action film that Kumail was in, but it was at least dynamic enough where it moved fairly fast, and it feels like Lovebirds just kind of lingers on much longer than it should for several scenes. Like there are a few scenes that I liked. I like the ways I like some of the lines that are written. Some of their improv is pretty good. I gotta admit, for like the first like minute or two, it works. You can tell they totally had to use so much improv in some of these scenes. Like in particular, if you look at the diner scene, there's a lot of inconsistencies with the food they have on the table. Like at one point they have like a plate in front of them. At one point they have a milkshake when they cut back. At one point they cut back the milkshake's like half full, and it's not a progression of time. It's one exchange. So you could tell they were doing multiple takes of this with just food continuity errors all over the place. So yeah, I wish I could love this movie more because I do love Kumail and Issa in these roles. They do have a great dynamic. They have some funny jokes, but I feel it just needs to be just a little bit honed, and I think they need a little bit of a better script than the kind of like murder mystery that they're delivered here, which is honestly just fairly routine for like a buddy action film. So yeah, I wish I could love the film more. It's got some great chemistry, but that that's about all the great stuff I can say about the film. Everything else is just kind of lukewarm and just fairly middle of the road for action comedy. So for the Lovebirds, 2.5 out of 5 stars.